We're just going to get this going, like literally. Thank you so much for coming today to What's Your Angle. Phil, thank you for being here. Before we get started, because we never remember to do this, anybody who wants to get a hold of Phil, he's with the CBOC team out of Phoenix, Arizona. We're going to have a way to contact him at the very top of the description on YouTube, and if we can, on Spotify as well. If you want to get a hold of Max or I, Max or me, you know how to. We'd love for everybody to subscribe to the channel. We'd love for everybody to join the Raise the Bar on Real Estate Facebook group, which will have links there. And obviously, if you're interested in joining the best mortgage bank in the United States, reach out to Max. And if you're in the Austin area, you want to talk to kind of like an OK brokerage, I'm joking. If you want to talk to us, you can get a hold of me. We'll have a link there and some info on how you can get a hold of me. For Bramlett Residential in Austin, Texas, we're the fastest growing independent brokerage in Austin by volume. All that said, Phil, thank you for being here. Max, do you want to start the introduction?
Yeah. Thank you guys for being here. Phil, it's just met for the first time yesterday, and that was awesome. And we're excited to have you on. Ladies and gentlemen, Phil Sexton is with CBOC group out in Arizona from EXP, and him and Eric met about a year ago at a conference for like-minded tech folks trying to make things better in the industry. And, we like to have folks on that are similarly minded. We don't always have folks on that are in real estate or mortgage. Like I said, Phil is in the Arizona area. He's been dealing a lot with the new compensation rules that have come out and has a really good insight on what they're doing out there. And so we were excited to have him on and kind of talk about what they're doing. And, in our kind of pre-meeting yesterday, it's really interesting how everyone's kind of coming to the same conclusions and doing things similarly. So, Phil, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. I think you kind of missed an opportunity, though, when you were saying where Eric and I met. It's obviously where, like, really handsome, good-looking, smart people go to hang out there with Mike Del Prete.
The problem is I would have,
Chili's,
but I wasn't. I was.
So it couldn't have been that. Yes. Yeah, no, it's an honor to be here. Appreciate the invite. I know that I'm a member of the Facebook group that you talked about, Eric, which is where we've kind of gone back and forth on some of these issues, and which is probably why we're here now talking, is because I can see the content that you're putting out. You can see the content that I'm putting out, and just how we're trying to be leaders in the conversation to help those that are around us. And I think that I'm kind of a geek when it comes to some of this stuff. I know for sure Eric is a geek when it comes to some of this stuff, and I mean that in the most endearing way. And Max, I assume you're a geek if you're hanging out with Eric, which is a positive note.
Well, 1,000%.
I will say this, Phil. So, like a lot of really smart, successful guys, you're also very humble. And what I've observed is, you're really involved in Arizona. So would you mind, you're on the risk management, you're the chair. I forget the exact title you have. But you've done a whole lot to lead agents in the Phoenix market, which is obviously a huge market. Would you mind just sharing your credentials?
Yeah, I, for my day job, run a residential real estate team. Jeff Seabuck and I partnered up about 12 years ago, and we've been running our team ever since. Our best year was 2021. We had 88 agents on the team. We closed $392 million in production. We're a little bit off of that, which is unfortunate, but I know we'll get back there. Tis the market, tis the season. But when I'm not in the office working on dollar productive activities, I like to volunteer, whether that's, at my kid's school or with a Rotary Club that my grandpa was a charter member of, or at the Arizona Association of Realtors. And 3 years ago, the incoming president called me and said, "Hey, Phil, I think that, you'd be good to chair the risk management committee in 2024. What are your thoughts there?" And I forgot to ask, are there any pending settlements that could potentially upend the industry or create a whole bunch of confusion? Because had I known that answer then, maybe my acceptance of the offer would have been different. Anyway, yeah, I was the chair of the Arizona Risk Management Committee this year. What a year. I got lucky. I'm blessed that this is the year that actually fell when I happened to be in that position, because what a great year to have a front row seat at what the association is doing to prepare the 50 or 60,000 realtors in Arizona for the changes that got brought down on all of us.
Yeah. And I will say, I think that the agents are incredibly lucky to have you. You're a very engaged leader, which doesn't doesn't happen often. I feel like we're similarly lucky in Austin as well. I think that's why, at least from my perspective, you guys seem to, the Phoenix market seems to be navigating this pretty well. Difficult thing to navigate, but your agents have direction. Tell me about some of the stuff that you've done. Tell me about what's working for you guys. I mean, you want to dive into contracts, I'm not sure, or just any thoughts you have on what's gone well in the past month.
Yeah, I think that holy smokes, what I'm proud of with the Arizona Realtors specifically is that they have come out with not with one way for the new world to work, but with options for agents to choose what way makes the most sense for them. And so in the association meetings, as we sit there preparing for what's coming down on August 17th, it was very important that the association didn't sit in a room and determine how all realtors in Arizona were going to do business in this new way. I think that that's a bad look. That I think instead, nor do I think that the brain power of that room is really the best entity to figure out what the new world is going to look like. Even in one of the meetings, I said, guys, we're going to have to see how the street does this. We're going to see what happens on the street, and then we're going to have to be able to evolve, change. One of the general counsel of the Arizona Realtors, he said, this is a time that his new favorite F word is fluid. This is a time that we have to remain.
I thought you were going to say a different F word. That's my favorite.
Flexible? Was that it? No,
Funded.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's it.
Funded? Yeah. Fiduciary. That's my favorite F word.
Exactly.
And so AAR came out with two versions of the buyer broker agreements, one a light and one an exclusive, right? The one that's a light is just an agreement to show property. And then they have an exclusive agreement that they modified based on the new rules. So they gave buyers agents options when it comes to abiding by the new rules about those agreements.
Just to compare, I mean, how long is the full, like the exclusive? How many pages is that one?
That's a good question. 3.
Well, the reason I'm asking, so
it's
we
like
have
3 or 4.
So we have 3 versions, and we have a long version. We have a limited, which is what you discussed, like to check that box and show property. And then we have a long form and a short form. And the short form is for agents that prefer to, work without every single potential scenario spelled out ahead of time. That's honestly me. I prefer to work with people in a capacity that I call it just like an at-will agreement, meaning that as long as we continue working well together, we're working well together, and you can terminate it at any time. And then many agents prefer to work with all of the terms spelled out on a 5-6 page agreement. And so they've done that here where we have those 3 options. I'm with you 1,000,000%. I think that providing agents with the tools to do business how they prefer to do business is the way to.
Yeah, our long is 3 pages and our short is 1 page.
Got it.
And same concept though. The short that's 1 page, it doesn't have a cancel at any, either party can cancel clause in it. It's an agreement that says we're going to work together. But what it does, like the trigger in it on who gets paid, is who writes the purchase contract. And that potential buyer can have multiple versions of that agreement signed with multiple agents. Oh. And he or she that writes the contract on the property is the one that is owed the compensation.
So that's interesting. And we didn't talk about this yesterday. We only have exclusive here. We don't have multiple buyer agent. I'll be honest. I would only recommend to my agents. Now this is our firm, but I would never recommend to any of our agents to not enter into an exclusive, to enter into an agreement with any buyer that wants to work with multiple agents. That sounds selfish, but I truly believe that it's not in the buyer's best interest to work with multiple agents in one market. I think that when that happens, agents start trying to sell them properties rather than work with them to find the best property alongside them. Now, that's my philosophy, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's right for us, and there are other agents that may want to work in other ways.
No, look, it's fun to talk with people that get it, that understand the nuances of the business, because that philosophy is a good one that you have the right to have. The other philosophy that I think isn't common out there is that I think having a buyer, if you are in an exclusive buyer agent agreement, to have a longer term agreement is in the buyer's best interest, because then the same pressure doesn't apply. Where if I have an agreement that's 30 days, I might be wanting to make sure we get them under contract right now on a house because my agreement is about to expire, as opposed to having a year-long agreement where, look, let's see how this market is doing. There's not as much pressure to make sure we get you under contract.
It's funny, and this is one of the reasons I love talking with you. I mean, other than like you crack funny jokes also, which I appreciate. But no, so we do term differently. We actually have the only proprietary form that we have in our brokerage is a proprietary buyer rep agreement. and it is at will. It says that the agreement terminates whenever they either buy a property or they terminate the agreement. And it specifically says they can terminate the agreement with an email or a text message. So whenever I show that to someone, I say, listen, this spells out how we're going to work together. It spells out what I'm going to get paid. And if I don't perform for you, send me a text message and you can work with somebody else that you feel like is a better fit for you. And that's just how we've always done business. And that's why it works really well for us. What you're describing is a way that works really well for a lot of very successful agents. And it's really cool to see, another successful, group that's doing things just slightly different, that's still acting in their client's best interest, with my second favorite F word, the fiduciary word, right?
Yeah, right now I think that our brokerage came out with 2 buyer broker agreements. Our state came out with 2 buyer broker agreements. One of our lead providers has a touring agreement. I got 5 clubs in my bag when I'm meeting with the client. Like, should I use the sand wedge this time? Should I use the putter? Should I use the driver?
You've got so many options. How do you decide? Do you go through all of them with them?
No,
What's the process there?
I don't, because I think that too many choices is a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And for our business, we get to choose which one works best for us and which one we feel most comfortable with. And this is the choice that we have made. So we present the forms that we feel most comfortable with. But I'll tell you that lead source oftentimes matters, because am I going to be meeting if I get a referral from a past client, or like my mom's friend from high school wants to buy a house, I don't have a timing pressure on that buyer that I might have with a lead that comes in from a sign call that wants to see a house today, right? Or not even a sign call, but just a property level lead is what I like to call it. A lead that comes in that's not my listing, but they want to see 123 Main Street. That has got a time crunch, because now I got an appointment to see that house. So I don't have as much flexibility to have them come in for a buyer consultation where we can fully review everything that I'm going to do as a part of an exclusive an agreement with them, and go into everything in a consultation matter that I can if I've got a referral or if I got somebody that's moving in from out of state. Right. And so depending on the scenario, it's just nice to have the clubs that you have in your bag, because depending on what scenario you want, makes the most sense for what club, you pull out the club. And I think for us, the important part is knowing the 5 forms that we have, and how can I talk to them? What are the pros and cons of each of them? Because the other thing that I have to be aware of is if somebody does walk into maybe one of the open houses that I'm sitting, and I no longer can say, are you working with an agent? I think that is an incomplete question you ask somebody, because if they say yes, what does that mean? I have zero context on whether they're in an exclusive agreement, a cancelable agreement, touring agreement. Like, I don't know what that means anymore. And so now the better question that we ask is, hey, have you signed an agreement with an agent to represent you on the buy side? And if they say yes to that, great. I have 5. I can't guess which one of those 5 they signed. And so if they pull up the version that they signed, which it might be from a brokerage, maybe Eric's got his own proprietary agreements that I've never seen before, right? But I've got to be able to understand the pros and cons of the different agreements that these leads that I'm trying to convert have possibly signed.
You want to hear a neat hack that I found relatively recently? I actually discovered it by reading through a ton of very confusing ICAs. Upload it to ChatGPT. It will nail it every time if you want to ask any contract question to it. Now, you have to upload it first and ask it to read it. But there were a couple of experiences I had where I looked at an agreement and said, oh, no, certainly this is the way it reads. ChatGPT disagreed with me. I sent it to my attorney. ChatGPT is batting 1,000 right now with the attorney. I'm not, right? So anyways, just as a sort of hack out there, everybody's trying to figure out how to use AI. And I know you love AI. It's one of the ways that we've used it pretty effectively.
It's a great hack. I would actually, what I need to do is I should upload the Arizona agreements that I'm actually very familiar with to see what loopholes ChatGPT has because one of the other things that I've had to become very comfortable with in this change in this day and age is relearning things that I learned yesterday, where yesterday, I think I got it. I understand. And then you run a scenario by somebody, ChatGPT, your broker, an attorney, and their interpretation of the exact same language is a little bit different. Right. You're like, dang it, I've been explaining this to, agents incorrectly. All right, I got to be fluid. I got to adjust my mind so that I can talk about it,
Well, and by the way, admit when you're wrong. I think that's a huge benefit. It's a huge character trait that can really benefit leaders is explaining whenever, hey, I got this wrong, guys. I wanted to let you know up front. to make sure nobody has the wrong idea. This is the correct answer. And I think that also really builds trust with your team members.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think that comes back to that fluid thing, right? Like you see it on the lending side too. Today the guideline is one thing, and tomorrow the guideline changes. And it's, you're always having to, at least with my guys, I'm always going back and saying, hey, like I know we've been doing it this way, but the rules have changed, and now we've got to pivot and we've got to go like this. So it's, that's really just kind of across the board.
Yeah. And Max, he can always say, God, these underwriters, let me tell you. And for us, we get to say, this broker, let me tell you.
Exactly.
Eric is stuck. He's got nobody to blame. He's like, oh, this AI tool, let me tell you.
Fun subject, because you and I agree on it quite a bit, but I think there's a lot of people probably in the audience that don't necessarily agree. So you were thrown an additional curveball, like one weekend, whenever EXP announced no more cooperative compensation. And I love your terminology. Do you want to explain how you've navigated that, what that means to you? I'll say up front, I completely agree with the decision to stop writing in shared commission and listing agreements, but I'll let you take it away, how you navigated that, what it means to you guys, and the challenges it's presented to you as well.
Yeah, I think that EXP obviously came out super early, and we're not going to be sharing compensation with co-brokes, cooperative compensation, phrases like that. Like in one of the videos that I created for the Arizona Realtors, one of the lines that they use is I've had to change my vocabulary to get rid of the word co-broke, because that's not, I don't think that that's a very good description. That's industry jargon. We might understand what that means. Cooperative compensation, we might understand what that means, but I'm not sure that the public understands what that means. And if we want people to get this business, I think one of the actual changes that is coming out of this lawsuit is that a lot of the state forms are having pressure put to make them more legible by a non-attorney.
Right.
Which is a wonderful space to get to. And so as I embrace that in our business too, I don't like talking about cooperative compensation. I like talking about brokers sharing commissions. Right. And EXP came out and said that they're not going to be sharing commissions with other brokers anymore, meaning offering co-brokes, right? Or offering cooperative compensation. I don't like those phrases. So instead I just say they're not sharing commissions with brokers anymore.
You followed up with, there's no reason for us to share our commission. The seller's just going to pay it directly. And they have every intention of doing.
No, part of the listing agreement that we use still authorizes the listing agent to communicate an offer of compensation. Shared is the wrong word, but to communicate an offer that the seller is willing to contribute towards the buyer agent's compensation. But it doesn't have to go to the listing agent and then over to the buyer agent to accomplish that. It can go directly from the seller to the buyer's agent. Yeah. And so now you've removed the brokers from the crosshairs of these lawsuits, because the principal, the seller, is offering the buyer broker compensation as an initiative, or as a incentive for that buyer to buy their house.
Well, go ahead, Max. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, that's like what we were talking about. That's like what we were talking about yesterday. I think that's the biggest misconception. Just, coming on my side of it, I'm not in the everyday to day of negotiating. And when you hear EXP is no longer offering cooperative compensation, the first thing you think is, oh, now they're not paying agents. They're not going to pay any buyer's agents. And that, I think, it creates this narrative of, it feeds into that sellers are not going to be paying buyer's agents anymore and all of that. And it's honestly, it's not true. But it's incumbent upon y'all and the lending side as well to educate buyers and make sure they understand exactly what all of this means. Yes, the sellers can still pay it. Yes, they likely will, because they know that's how they're going to get the best result in general. So I think
I will say this in terms of best result, right? What does a seller want? They want the most cash in their pocket that they can get, right? What does the buyer want? The buyer wants the house, and they generally want less cash coming out of their pocket.
And the lowest interest rate.
Exactly. So how do you accomplish that? Well, you ask the seller to pay this, and then you adjust price in some way. It doesn't change the monthly payment much, and it's how things have been done forever. And that's the reason they've been done this way, is because sellers are sensitive to their net, buyers are sensitive to their cash to close. And that's why I predict that the seller will continue to pay the buyer agent commission for a long, long time.
Shelly asks in the chat, then how does the buyer agent broker get paid? And literally from the seller to the buyer broker. So just like the seller is going to make a contribution towards their broker, their listing agent to get paid, they're going to make a contribution towards the buyer's broker to pay them as well. There's actually a form that we're looking at the Arizona Realtors right now at making it a state form, because, you know, Arizona Realtors, I think lots of states have created forms because of this new world that we're in that still allow for shared compensation.
Right.
And so now the state has put out these forms so that it continues to allow this practice that some brokers are saying, I don't want to use that form though. I understand that the state has allowed that. We're not going to allow that here though. And so brokerages that have taken a stance have come up with their own forms on how to accomplish that. Shelley, I'll send Eric the form if you want to forward it to Shelley.
Well, I thought you were going to, I wish you could draw on your screen, Phil, because I actually copied a video. I did it just in a diagram with the simple question: how does the buyer agent's broker get paid? Well, in the past, the seller paid the listing broker, who then paid the buyer broker. And it was like a turn like this. And now it is just a direct line from the seller to the buyer broker. That's it. Now, we don't see any of this because it just shows up on the settlement statement. But Max, we've been doing this for a month now. Have you seen any problems where if the contract is written correctly, which is not that hard to do, that this is problematic in any case?
No, the only thing is that you have to communicate with the buyer and the buyer's agent to make sure that is all of the buyer's agent compensation coming from the seller's side, or is the buyer paying any of it, and making sure that if the buyer's paying some of it, you're disclosing that up front and qualifying them with that. But it's just, all you need is communication. Other than that, there are no issues. And not even to say that's an issue. It's not. It's just a new way of, communicating and doing business.
Yeah. Here's the piece that I think makes the most impact with lenders in today's new world. And that is, at what point is the lender going to know whether the buyer has to increase their cash to close on this property or not? Like, at what point does the lender approve somebody for a loan knowing that they have a buyer broker agreement that says they're going to have to pay their buyer broker whatever bananas, right? Like, if you got to pay your buyer broker 18 bottles of champagne, and the lender is the one that's in charge of making sure that the buyer's qualified to get the loan and pay those 18 bottles of champagne, then the lender might come back and say, hey, look, Eric, your buyer can qualify for the loan, but they can only pay for 9 bottles of champagne. Make sure that when you're negotiating that deal, you understand what their purchase power is.
Yeah, and that,
Max,
so I was going to say, I mean, that's part of it, right? As we're talking to buyers and buyers agents now, we're saying, hey, look, they're asking for estimates on these properties. And we're saying, okay, we're sending this over. This assumes that the seller is paying all of the buyer agent compensation.
Right.
If that's not the case, we need to know. What's going to happen with a lot of folks, because I don't need the buyer's rep agreement. Like, there's nothing that I'm tied to. It's in section H of the closing disclosure. So that can just be added at the end and changed or whatever. So the people that aren't having these conversations up front, those are the ones that are going to get the final closing disclosure from title. And all of a sudden it's $10,000 more than anyone expected, because now you have this $10,000 on the buyer's side. So, it's just about having that clear communication up front. This is how we're doing it. Let me know if this changes. Now we got a contract. Okay, cool. Just making sure all the compensation is being paid from the seller side. Great. Sorry, Melanie. No, you're good.
I'm back. I froze.
But that's Sorry. Really that's all it really takes. Communication.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, the key word here is communication, right?
Yeah, that's the new C word.
Communicate next Tuesday.
Sorry, Eric. But you know what? When I said that, so last week I chaired the Industry Partners Conference for AAR, lenders, title, appraisers, realtors in the room. And I said that communication was the new C word with a straight face. Nobody broke. We just moved right past it. Eric, your reaction to it made it bad. But
I'm 12 years old. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. But it's true that like the game is so much different now with your lenders. And even the pre-qual forms in Arizona haven't been updated yet, but they need to be, because there's a new variable that is now on the table that wasn't in the past.
But how do you update the form, right? I mean, because like what we're asking for now, at least in the Texas side, Florida as well, like, have you verified cash to close? Sure.
Okay, so what do you use for cash to close? Do you use down payment, or do you do down payment plus BBA amount?
Well, it depends. It depends on the conversations that you've had with the buyer and the buyer's agent.
Agreed. What if they came to you first, Max? Then what do you put on the pre-qual form when you're giving it to an agent? That they have the ability to pay the agent, or they're going to need to negotiate? They're going to have to find a house that they can negotiate it into the deal.
My letter is going to say specifically, I have verified assets, right, for this transaction.
For how much compensation?
It doesn't have the compensation on there, but does it really need that? Do you need the letter to say that on there?
I don't think it does. I think that, I mean, right now it's still an industry standard for the seller to pay the buyer agent commission. So I look at it like you're borrowing problems that don't exist if you start introducing these hypotheticals that typically don't happen. So Max could write in a number of contingencies that aliens could land, that, you know, all of these different things could happen that could FUBAR the loan. But at the end of the day, sellers are used to paying the buyer agent commission. The market standard is that that's the case. Why are we worrying about it as though that's going to change? It hasn't yet changed.
Austin sounds great. I should come there.
We're pretty laid back around here, man.
So, you know, let's just go with real world stories from the road. I don't know that I want to broadcast this, but we put a full price offer in on a listing with our compensation being included in the deal, and the seller said, "Sorry, I'm not paying compensation."
But what I would paint that seller as unreasonable, right? I mean,
okay, but the buyer loved the house, so they raised the price.
Okay,
great. And did they get the house?
Then they're cash to close.
Right. Like, no, I'm just saying that, like, as much as I would like to think that the world is still okay with paying it, there comes down to these negotiations that are going to happen. And even the client that is okay with paying a portion of it, but not the entire thing, has happened in our world too. I had a seller, as ridiculous as this sounds, let's just, the caveat here is, hey, we all work with the public, right? The public is crazy. You get all kinds of crazy scenarios that happen.
I agree and I disagree.
So let me tell you this one.
Go ahead.
Here's the scenario. We write the offer, full comp inside of the offer, and with no concessions asked for. And the seller comes back and their counter is half comp, and the other half you can use as concession.
Yeah.
What logic does that make? It nets out the exact same. The buyer took the concession and the comp and made their full comp, which was what their original offer was. But yet here we have to be able to manage the other side's perception of the new world and some of the crazy stuff that comes across the table.
So here is, okay, and you know, to talk about all of our history for a second, you know, Russell Shaw, we all are friends with Russ and have gotten a bunch of great advice from him over the years. And what Russ says, which I believe very strongly, is that 80% of people are a joy to work with and they're easy to work with. And then you have roughly 17% that are difficult, but you can manage them. And then 3% that are completely insane. And if you have that 3% actor in the transaction, be it a client, be it an agent, the deal is probably not going to come together, and you have to walk away from that. That's a completely insane person. But the 17%, which is who you ran into, it's somebody who's making their life more difficult than it needs to be. That's when we earn our money. That's whenever we say, okay, this is how we're going to massage this deal. And I would propose that anybody who flatly refuses to pay a commission under any circumstance is in that 3%. Because they are refusing to sell their house over something that flatly doesn't affect them. You can structure the deal in the way that they will get what they want, which is money in their pocket and exactly how much money they want in their pocket. So if they say, I hate agents, I don't want any agents to ever earn a penny, the buyer has to pay this, that's an insane statement.
Fair. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I agree. We do our best. I mean, obviously I'm a volunteer at the state level, and so we kind of do our best to deal with the 80. Right. I can't deal with the 20. We're not going to have 20-page buyer broker agreements. Let's keep it 3. And let's take care of 80% of the scenarios here with these forms. And if stuff comes up, and even if a problem happens with one of the forms, it's got to happen multiple times in order for us to modify how we're going, you know, the state level forms.
Right.
Then I have to apologize. Like, I see some of the chats over there with some acronyms that I don't get. I assume there's lots of people on here from Texas, and I just don't understand.
There's some I don't get either, but I don't pay attention to a whole lot of stuff ever. So I tend to focus on like when you're like, oh, we're going to focus on the 80. I generally tend to focus on like the smallest percentage I possibly can and still make it through the day, so I don't have to remember as much stuff. So.
Yeah, awesome.
There's a big portion of his brain over here focused on climbing and biking, and so he can't let that infiltrate.
Phil, tell us some more.
It keeps cutting out.
You know, what difficulties have you guys had on the listing side? So EXP, I think on the right side of history, coming out, you know, in front and saying we're no longer going to write listing agreements that have shared compensation in there. that cause problems because people call you and say, are you offering a co-broke? And you guys say,
sorry, my internet keeps cutting out. I was just frozen for the last 20 seconds.
yeah, I think we got a little bit of a sketchy connection.
Need to get on that Starlink.
I know, man. At our office, whenever I put Starlink up for a bit because the internet was so bad, we used to joke that the pigeons were flying over whenever it would start sketching out a little bit.
My internet sucks.
There we go.
Sorry, I wish my internet didn't suck.
That's okay,
Normally
man.
It works fine.
What I was asking you is on the listing side, and we talked about this yesterday a bit, that confusion amongst the agent population has been tough to deal with. You guys were really early saying, hey, contractually, we're no longer going to offer shared compensation, which is something agents have been used to now for 40 years. How do you deal with that? Whenever agents call and say, hey, I'll only show your property if you're offering a 3% co-broke or whatever it is that they're demanding, what do you guys say at that point?
And the listing agreement that we use still authorizes me to communicate an offer of compensation to the buyer's agent.
Got it.
So even though we don't do co-brokes, we don't have shared compensation, my seller is still willing to play. Typically, most of our listing agreements, our seller is willing to pay a certain number towards comp. And so I say it that way, and I'm not going to use the form. So back to the whole concept that we started with, AAR created 2 paths to get paid. One of the paths is shared compensation with the broker-to-broker agreement. The other path is an addendum to the purchase contract that it's just negotiated in with the purchase contract. So because our broker doesn't accept that one, we default to this one over here.
Right.
And just because our broker doesn't allow us to share compensation with other brokers doesn't mean that our sellers aren't offering compensation to the buyer broker agent. It's just the path that changed, not the concept that changed. Right? I can't say that enough. And maybe you're right. I should be able to draw on the board or whatnot to show like. So when an agent calls and says, "Hey, what compensation are you offering?" What does it say on the listing agreement? That we're offering 8 bananas. Right. We're offering 8 bananas. Fantastic. I'll show your property this afternoon. Great. Hey, do you want to execute it before we negotiate the contract? I'm like, well, if you do, here's the form that our brokerage uses because I can't use that AAR form, that Arizona form. And they're like, oh, okay, well, then I'll just include it on the contract with the seller compensation addendum, which is what it's called here in Arizona. We say, okay, great. That works perfect.
So a question for you, and I don't know the answer. You and I agree on a whole lot, but we do things differently sometimes. Are you coaching your agents to call ahead before they show properties?
I hate that idea. I don't think it matters. I think that's a dinosaur. Like, that's like calling ahead to say, would your seller take less than the list price?
Exactly.
Like, who cares? What are you going to call and ask? Of course, If your offer makes sense, then they're going to accept it. Yeah. And of course, like, what do agents do? Agents negotiate. That's what we do. We are negotiators. We are the fiduciary to help people who can't negotiate for themselves understand how to get the best deal based on their terms without letting emotions get in the way. And so I'm not going to get hung up. What if they said 0? Oh, my seller's offering 0%. Hey, buyer, they're offering 0%. Like what? Do you like the house? Let's write an offer and I don't care what they say, which is why.
If you're going to make a call, I think the important questions are things like this. Like, is there anything really important to your seller? Do they want a lease back? What's an ideal offer look like to them? Ask these open-ended questions. How can we make the offer look attractive to your side so that we can focus on what's important to us? And like you said, negotiate. It's part of our job. Somebody in the tech in prop tech was pointing out that for an industry that touts how great of negotiators we are, we sure are pretty scared of having to talk about this one point of negotiation because it's been talked about now for months.
Yeah, but I think that that fear comes because that fear doesn't typically come from listing agents.
Right. Because
they are used to meeting with the client, explaining what their value is and what they charge. That fear comes from the other side, which didn't have, maybe they've only listed houses of trusted friends or referrals. They haven't had to go into strangers' properties and convince them to pay them a large amount of money in order to prepare the house.
Agree with you 1,000%. Agents that have a lot of experience listing properties have had absolutely no problem navigating this on the buy side. It's been no issue whatsoever.
Yeah, because it's just a different sales presentation for that. You get to outline the 11 things that you do when you sign this agreement with your client and how that's going to benefit them and how that's ultimately going to save them money.
So here's a bit of a trap, but I don't think you'll have a problem with it because I don't think you'll even look at it as a trap. It could ruffle some feathers. What do you think about calling ahead as it pertains to steering?
I love this question. I think that as it pertains to steering. So you mean if I call ahead
if a buyer's calling ahead, buyer agent's calling ahead to say, what are you paying?
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that is flirting with steering? Do you think it is steering?
I think that it's pretty black and white. And who is the one that's steering? I think that it's illegal, unethical for agents to steer. And I think that it's perfectly okay for buyers to steer.
Okay.
Okay. And so when we're using a blanket word like steering, first I got to know who's doing it. Because if the buyer spoke with Max and Max said, dude, you can afford this property, but you don't have any money to come out of pocket to pay for representation. And then that buyer comes to us and says, I'm only going to be able to buy properties where they're offering compensation. So unless if they're a hard no on that, like I don't even want to get excited about that property, then me as the agent can say, okay, I will try to talk them out of it because I don't think that makes any sense. I think that we should present offers on all properties that we potentially want to buy. But
it's not really, I mean, in this market,
the buyer has that right.
It's not real hard in this market right now to get a property 3% off a list. It was very hard to do that 2 years ago, but right now getting a 3% concession, certainly there are scenarios where you can, but it's relatively doable, I would say.
Yeah. And I think that, as the market changes and we start to see appraisal issues, this conversation is going to evolve and it's going to morph into how are we going to navigate those appraisal issues and what are we going to try to
gold too.
I know, man.
Steer off up front. Did I freeze again?
Well,
Sorry,
we'll
guys.
fill the air. I'll be the fake Phil for a second.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, when Phil gets back, I'd like to hear his thoughts on this. You there? I don't look at steering as black and white. I look at most things as a spectrum, right? And I do think that people can be steer-ish with best intentions, but with probably some fear. And I know that there are a lot of buyer agents out there that are very fearful of having a conversation about commission. And I understand that. The correct path is to get over that fear and learn how to talk about your commission with your buyers. That's the right way to do it. One way that buyers agents are doing this is they're talking to their buyers and they're saying, if they're not going to offer to pay, do you want to not see this house? And they will very strongly encourage them to exclude any properties that haven't said outright they want to pay a buyer agent commission. And it makes their job easier, especially in a high inventory environment like we're in. But I would say that that's a bit steery. I think that whenever you're discouraging somebody from looking at properties they might want to see simply because you don't want to go through a bit of twists and turns in order to get what they want, it's not egregious by any means, but I think you're certainly not doing your job as well as it could be done.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to continue to apologize for my internet. Thanks for taking it on when you see that I've frozen. Appreciate that. Yeah, so there's a Northwest MLS, I think was their their listing agreement was put online somewhere. And I thought that it was so good on the different ways that it broke down what the seller's options are. And, for our Arizona listing agreement, it breaks out what the listing agent's getting paid, in addition to that, what the listing will get paid if an unrepresented buyer buys the house, what offer of compensation we're able to communicate to the other side. But it doesn't right now have that variable commission line. And I think you brought up variable the other day on the call and I didn't jump on it. But do you guys use variable commission in Texas?
We don't, and I strongly discourage it. I think that it doesn't align anyone's goals at that point in time. I think that what it does is it introduces, it's right there in the word, it introduces another variable that's going to distract the agent from what their primary goal should be, which is to help their client get the best result for that client. It's sort of like negotiating a couch whenever you're negotiating $1 million house.
Okay. It's negotiate. Yeah. Follow through. What?
Well, so make sure I understand variable commission, because I guess we're lucky in Austin. Variable commissions, effectively, you're earning a different commission based on the price point. Is that correct? Based on
fair.
Oh, God,
Thank you for the
man.
definition. Yeah, variable commission in our world is where you offer a different commission if you represent both sides on the transaction.
Oh no, we very staunchly, our firm will not represent both sides. We will act as an intermediary as long as there's a pre-existing relationship between both clients, but they each have their own agent, they each have their own representation, and we have a very strong stance against double ending is what we call it. So
great. So is that brokerage specific?
No, it's not
your brokerage.
Yeah. And there is, whenever we talk about, true intermediary within the brokerage, well, whenever you have these mega brokerages like EXP, we're 100 agents now, so we run into it more and more. And just the way that the environment is, where you have a lot of brokerages, a lot of agents working under one brokerage, in my opinion, it would just be impossible in this environment to try to say, no, you can't ever act as an intermediary. It just wouldn't happen.
Yeah. And I see in the chat, somebody said dual agency is illegal in Texas. Yeah. In Arizona, it's allowed. They've changed the name because dual agency is impossible. Your limited representation is what we call it in Arizona, because what you're able to do to represent that client when you have both sides goes down. So it's not that you're the dual agent. You're actually a limited agent on both sides of the parties.
And you see this a lot where people say dual agency is illegal in Texas. I'm sure that technically that's correct, but there are agents all over the place in Texas very recently that will double end deals. I mean, it happens all the time. So yeah. I'll get on ChatGPT and figure out exactly what dual agency being illegal in Texas even means. But I know with strong certainty that one agent will rep both the buyer and the seller. I mean, a lot. It happens. That's what we are staunchly against, is one agent trying to represent both the buyer and the seller, because you can't have two clients that are on opposing sides and act in each of their best interests. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah. We don't like it. Don't get me wrong. On our team, if we'll have somebody else, let's put somebody else's name on this. Let's give somebody else the representation on that side so that it's not the same person doing both.
Right.
But so the last point about that Northwestern listing agreement that I really liked is that it also has a section in it that says my seller isn't going to put a specific amount that they're willing to contribute towards your buyer agent fee, but the listing agent is authorized to share with the other side that they're willing to pay.
Right.
Please submit it in an offer. And so it doesn't put a real number on it. It doesn't put an actual number on it. The reason why I like that in Arizona is because right now, if I put a number on that listing agreement, now I'm obligated to share that number and that number exactly. That is what I have in writing. I like when somebody calls and says, you guys offering compensation on your property? Absolutely, included with the offer. My seller is prepared to pay for it. I love that as an answer, but now I have to write in special language into my listing agreement to be able to have authorization to give that as an answer.
Right. We have a listing agreement from Unlock, from ABOR, which I like a whole lot. It doesn't have shared commission as an option, and it does have the line where it says, listing brokers is permitted to advertise X amount, and they've got a dollar amount there. We figure out a hack where you can just hit the space bar and type in 3%. And so that's what we do.
Or whatever number.
Or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we do, because in reality, that's what we're offering. Right. Shift gears for a minute. And I love a million things about you, Phil. One of them is that you like talking about difficult topics as much as I like talking about difficult topics. So genders, how many of them are there? Joking.
I have 3 kids and only 2 genders. That's my experience.
Clear cooperation.
It might change.
Clear cooperation. Talk to me about clear cooperation, what you think. There's a lot of Austin people here. And as we discussed, clear cooperation hasn't been a big deal here. And we'll talk about why for a minute, but it has been a big deal where you guys are. And you have an unpopular opinion. I'd love to talk about it again.
Great. Yeah. This is great. Yeah. Nobody likes your answer, Phil. Let's hear it.
You do a good job of explaining it.
Look, I'm going to talk about it. Thank you. I love having difficult conversations. I was against clear cooperation when it first came out, right? It wasn't, I was telling you, Eric, that we had kind of built up a whole lead gen program on how to kind of take advantage of listings that weren't on the MLS and distribute it out into the entire world yet. Clear cooperation came and I'm like, this is ridiculous. There's obviously scenarios where it doesn't make sense for these properties to be on the MLS. But what our MLS's reaction was, because they were going to enforce clear cooperation. But in enforcing clear cooperation, they also included a coming soon status in the MLS. And so now I can put a listing on the MLS for 30 days in the coming soon status. And the difference between active and coming soon, active is syndicated to all the public websites out there. Coming soon is not. So in a sense, I have this 30-day window where that property lives in coming soon, not on Zillow, for example. Yes, there's a sign at the property. I can now put a sign at the property, because it's in the MLS, I'm abiding by the rules, but it's still hard for the public to find the details about that property without coming to us, right? It does not count days on market. It does not show price reductions if you change the price before it goes active, right? It's literally our window to check out, to pre-market the property so that we can do these like test things with properties.
The only way I like it a lot. I like the coming soon status a whole lot. I would propose that it should be unlimited. You should be able to have coming soon status as long as you would like there to be coming soon status, because that's effectively what we can do with off-market properties. And there are going back to, you always want to look at the edge cases and take it to the extreme to see if it works for that. there are luxury properties that will sit, as a pocket for years, right? And I think that that's important to have that flexibility. But I will say, for the vast majority of properties, the way that MLS handles this works really, really well. Kudos.
And the way your MLS handles it is by not enforcing it. Is that?
Yeah, always
Right.
has.
Yeah. So I told you yesterday that I'm a fan of clear cooperation right now. My opinion changed, right? And it's because now my business has changed so that I can play within the rules that we're given and
Right.
run a good business. I'm there. We've got that. I think that clear cooperation actually helps keep the MLS relevant given the new landscape that we're in right now. Because the MLS just took away the compensation, I think that was a big sticky point of why we liked the MLS is, look, if you don't use the MLS, then how are we going to have offers of compensation that are communicated?
Right.
Well, now that that's gone, I like the MLS because it's a catch-all of all of the properties in our marketplace that are being advertised. And I think that comes with efficiencies. And those that want to break that down and get rid of clear cooperation. So now I'm going to have 80% of the properties in the MLS, 10% of the properties are going to be on realtor.com, 5% of the properties are going to be on exp.com, 3% of the properties are going to be on compass.com. I think that hurts us. And we're going to have corporations that come in and they say, oh no, homes.com should be the winner. Pay us $1,100 and we're going to promote your property. And now you see the corporate profits of these companies that have come up to allow agents to get advertising for their listings, all because MLS got disintermediated. It got decentralized.
So I will say, I'm opposed to clear cooperation from a competitive standpoint. I think that whenever you have to continue to compete and prove value, that it causes people to innovate. I'm with you. I agree with you 1,000% that there's high value in the MLS, and it would be very detrimental to us, to our businesses if the MLS. I don't know. I'm not fearful that the MLS would go away here, at least without clear cooperation, because it just frankly doesn't exist. So we're kind of a good sort of test tube to look at that. The MLS, to stay relevant, they need to continue providing value. They need to get really, really good at tracking sold data, which they're already very good at. But what's one of the most important points right now? It's what commission is being paid, and there's nothing in this settlement that says we can't track what commission was paid in the rear view. So I'm hopeful that this starts to be tracked so we can look backwards at it and we can have this sort of competitive intelligence. There are other ways they can stay relevant. Technology, that's one of the biggest pieces that agents look for. But anyways, yeah, I very respectfully disagree with you on clear cooperation, but I completely understand your position. I think it's a great position.
So here's a part that I hear, just because we like to be controversial, right?
Yeah.
Are exclusive agreements with buyers, like, you think that is a benefit for the consumer? So if a buyer enters into an exclusive agreement with somebody at your real estate company, now, are they just shutting the door on all the exclusive properties that exist at other brokerages?
No, because the brokerages don't really have exclusive properties. And Compass tried it. That was part of their business plan whenever they had $1 billion and were trying to take over the world with that $1 billion, was they had a rule that it had to be a Compass exclusive for 2 weeks before it could go into the MLS. It's really funny. You see Refkin now talking about CCP and needs to go away for the consumer and all this stuff. It's like, hey man, there's some stuff in the past that maybe wasn't super defensible. I'm not sure if this is really consumer based or not. But back to the example, they just couldn't enforce it in Austin because everybody wanted those to be marketed to their peers who were with other brokers, and nobody has the lion's share of agents or the lion's share of listings in Austin. So there really is no such thing here that I'm aware of that's an office exclusive where anybody would agree that you can only sell it within that office. What seller would agree to that? It makes no sense whatsoever. Why would I say I only want to sell it to other Bramlett residential agents? That would be a really silly decision to make.
Yeah. So the last office exclusive listing that we had, this seller was like, $5 million, big estate, don't want to go public on the MLS anywhere. I know that you're connected. You guys do a bunch of business. I'm happy to sign an office exclusive listing with you where if you bring the buyer, we can work on a deal, but I don't want this property out there anywhere else.
Yeah.
So for that scenario, to answer Robert's question in the chat, yes, we should pay attention to what the seller actually wants. And even though clear cooperation exists, I can still have it as an office exclusive. And now obviously there's, thousands of EXP agents in Phoenix. So at least that gets sent out to,
I don't know. No, that's against their best interest completely.
They don't want it public.
Yeah, for sure. Because, okay, I'll tell you.
You don't really want to move. Like, I'll move if you bring me the buyer.
Okay, so in Austin, just to use us as an example, because this is what I know, right? So I keep going to luxury because I'm aware of luxury. I was never what I would consider a luxury agent, but I certainly acted in that space a bit. And there is a secondary MLS called the Austin Luxury Network, where if you want to float off markets to other luxury agents who typically have qualified buyers, you can put it on the Austin Luxury Network and you will get good exposure from other agents, and it will not be in the news. It will not be on Zillow, and it works incredibly well. Now, if you don't have something like ALN in your market, then you are still connected. And as an EXP agent, I'm sure that you know plenty of well-qualified agents throughout Phoenix. You would want to float that too, and that your seller would want that exposure that could potentially have a buyer. That's my argument against the office exclusives. I think that they are very, very detrimental to the consumer.
So for us, because clear cooperation is enforced here,
Yeah,
that's the only stepping stone that I have.
yeah.
Right? Like, got to use that as it's all about.
It sounds to me. I mean, it sounds to me like clear cooperation, as you see it, is well intentioned and can certainly serve a purpose, but probably needs some work. That's how I would probably summarize it.
Yeah, I would think that MLSs, the clear cooperation that works in areas that have a certain subset of MLS rules, let all other MLSs should look at what that subset of rules are to determine if we're going to enforce it here. We should, align with why it's working in other places.
I totally agree. Absolutely agree.
No. What other topics? Let's talk about concessions versus compensation and how it applies to lump. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you want to talk about IPC? Yeah, you love that topic. We've got.
I know.
We can keep going as long as you guys would like to. Up to you, Phil.
I do. It's a hot button for me right now. How does it work in MLS in your area? So when a property goes under contract, who's in charge of putting in any concessions into that? Does the MLS track concessions in your area now, or did they get rid of it?
Well, it has forever, but it's a field that hasn't been. It's a field that hasn't been used since the mid 2000s. Max and I were talking about this early in your career, Max. How many loans do you think had seller contribution towards closing costs in, like, say, 2005?
Well, back then, the majority of them did at that time because it was really a buyer's market then, right? And we would even do, there was this program, there was several of them out there. Nehemiah, Neighborhood Gold was my favorite, but it was technically a 501c3 company that you could go into a property. It's how I bought my very first property. With an FHA loan, you go in, you tell the seller, look, I got to raise the sales price $10,000, and you're going to contribute $12,000 to this company that is then going to give me the money to use for my down payment and closing costs. And I mean, man, we crushed it with that kind of stuff, and we would see it all the time. And then later in the years, you started seeing it less and less and less, and now it's obviously currently it's making a really big comeback.
Yeah, but to answer your question, it was used and it was used really heavily in the mid 2000s because it was relevant to pricing a property. I don't think it's used at all. We have a repairs field in the MLS as well that I rarely see used. Now, as far as policing, the MLS does a pretty good job of policing this stuff, but short of calling every agent with a sold property and saying, hey, did you remember to add concessions to this? I'm not sure how I think you have to do kind of an awareness campaign if you want to. But back to you.
I agree with that.
Yeah, this is your topic. I mean, tell me what you think about this.
I'm on my awareness campaign.
Yeah.
Right. And it's because I think that the way that Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA have come out and said, as long as everybody keeps having compensation be a part of a deal, then we'll allow it to be part of the deal and not count it towards the IPCs, right? The interested party concessions.
Right.
And it's just fascinating to me that the government says, on one hand, hey, you guys are all doing it the same way. NAR settlement, boom, you got to change it up because it's all done the same way. But then on the other hand, they're saying, hey, as long as you guys keep doing it the same way, we'll allow you to keep doing it that same way. I love the ironic. I mean, it's not the first thing that I feel the government is a little bit crazy.
I told you yesterday. This is like mom and dad, right?
Yeah.
That aren't talking to each other.
Yes.
Go ask your mom. Go ask your dad.
Yes. But in our specific area, appraisers, I don't know that they put, you can't use the concession field as it's 100% accurate. And I'm fully aware of that.
Right.
But what I don't want to happen is when an offer is written and concessions are asked for, and then those concessions get used for compensation. Because that's allowed here. Gosh. And if that listing agent puts the concession in the MLS data field, so now appraisers come in and the listing agent miscategorized that number, and let's say that it was $15,000 on a $500,000 house. Now, what's the value of that house? $485,000. Let's say that happens again on the next house, and the appraiser says, well, now the values of these homes are $485,000, and the next listing agent does it wrong too. Now the values of those homes are $460,000. What?
Right.
No, the listing agent miscategorized that number. The value is still up there. They just called it a concession when it was really compensation.
Yeah. So we have a comment that says we can't use compensation in the concession field. I honestly don't know because nobody uses a concession field anymore. I do think it's important to track this stuff. I understand why the board made the decision. It was legal advice that said, hey, you just need to stay away from anything that has the word commission or compensation in it. I think that was probably a bad decision. I think that if you look at it a bit harder and say, look, we're using this for tracking purposes, then it makes sense. But the light bulb I had while you were talking about this information and the fact that it is not verified, really the entities that could really track this for us are the title companies, escrow, right?
Yeah.
They have the verified information. If they would begin to track it, they need one piece of paper signed by parties saying that it's anonymized or whatever you want to do with it. But we're going to track the commission that was paid here in order to be referenced later. That's a very, very strong value add that I would love to see. I don't know if it'll be put together, but that would be really amazing.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know that the real estate industry wants that to be put together, because
that's a competing MLS at that point. Yeah.
No, I mean,
sure.
one of the big pushes on this whole lawsuit thing is we want to see commissions go down. And the way that they got there was by not having commissions published. What?
Here's another topic, right? Part of what they said in the lawsuit, their logic behind it was that buyers and sellers pay more in the US than anywhere else in the world. And I can strongly argue that our system in the United States is more pleasant and better than anywhere else in the world. You have an auction system in Australia that's incredibly unpleasant, very stressful. Nobody likes it. And you're starting to see buyer agents in Australia because of that. The logic behind the lawsuit, there were pieces of it that made a lot of sense. Don't buy into there's collusion simply because people are paying more for services in the United States than they are elsewhere, because the services are not equal.
We agree.
Phil,
Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple more questions, but before we get to like kind of the fun one, what additional changes do you see coming?
In Arizona, because that's where I am. Sorry, I know for the Texas folk, but I think that our state is going to get rid of publishing forms that allow for shared broker-to-broker compensation.
Yeah.
And I think that our state is going to go towards forms that allow for compensation to be paid, but not in that manner that the attorneys don't like. I think that shared compensation goes away at a greater level.
Why do you think that?
I think that there's a simple solution, because I think that was a big target. I think that that's a big reason why anti-competitive or antitrust lawsuits have came about, is because, one party collects all of this money and then shares it with this other party to create a transaction. I think that the optics of that looks bad. And do we want to continue with those optics? Or when there's clearly other options that are simple for us to take, as long as we get our minds around it, we don't have to have that. I collect all the money and then share it with you for bringing me a buyer. I think that looks bad. And why continue down that path when there's other methods to accomplish, in a sense, the same thing?
It's a bold decision if they make that decision. And when you say the state boards, you're talking about the Arizona Association of Realtors. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Yes. Because you obviously saw California come out with it already, right? Like they pulled it all out of their forms. And that's fine. Their agreements were so bad that I think that that's what they had to do in order to get the DOJ off their back, is give them what they wanted. I don't know that all states have the same problem with their forms being as bad as California, which is why you haven't seen other states make that move yet. But, in our world at the association level, I've got to pay attention to the private sector, because I think the private sector has some deep pockets to figure out what's best in order to mitigate risk moving forward.
I think that was the driving reason why EXP did away with it. And I think it's an incredibly smart reason to do away with it. I will say that strong anecdotal evidence that people like to hold on to the past. I wrote a newsletter, the title of which was "Why You Should Stop Using Cooperative Compensation Today," and in parentheses, "and the sky won't fall." And I got some hate back from it. I mean, people, you were dead wrong, unsubscribe, F you, things like that, which I can take, that's fine. But I don't see a logical argument against doing away with it. I don't see a logical argument for keeping cooperative compensation. It's a relic. It makes no sense in my opinion.
And I think that the people that are anti getting rid of it is because they don't understand that there's a solution to still get paid by the seller if you're a buyer's agent. And they think when you're saying that means that sellers, because that's what the DOJ actually has gone further to say, we don't think that the sellers should be able to compensate the buyer agents. But I don't think that that's going to hold up in court, to be honest. I think they're not going to be able to tell the private parties in America, they're not going to be able to put that much power down onto the individual sellers.
I think they can come in and say no more cooperative compensation. I think that they can very easily come in and say this has to get out of the contracts. And I think that certainly looks like a win for them. So if they decide that they can't come in and regulate in a way that says sellers can no longer contribute whatsoever, which again, I completely agree with you that won't happen. This is a very easy win for them.
Yeah. I had something happen to me for the first time. I was moderating a panel with the CEO of our local MLS, the general counsel from the state association, 3 big brokers in the room, and I had row 2, a agent that looks like she's been in the business for a minute, I mean like a long time, stand up and talk about how bad this new world is and what a disgrace that this industry has become because they let all of these changes come down.
Was she around in the 80s? It sounds like she was, but
yeah, no, absolutely. And it was the first time that I got my feathers ruffled when I was emceeing a panel where like I felt like I now had to defend these panel members that were sitting next to me. And I laid into her because she is like, I've gone to classes, and what I've learned from all these classes that I've gone to is that nobody knows what's going on and everybody's confused. And I just let her have it. I'm like, dude.
What'd you say to her? No, please, sure.
I said, there's a phase of it that honestly I blacked out. Like I wish I had a recording of exactly what I said because I laid into
I just see Will Ferrell. What did I say?
Yeah, right. Exactly. There's a little bit of that, but I started with, for you to put on your education of what's going on. If you're saying that everybody else is the one that is responsible for you to understand what this world is, that's where you've immediately started on the wrong path. I went and downloaded the 111-page settlement, whatever the settlement agreement was, the NAR published out. I was like, the worst part of that agreement is that you couldn't control F it, right? Like you couldn't search on that document for the content that you wanted. And so I ran it through an OCR reader so that I could actually search this doc so that it was easier for me to consume and I could understand what parts mattered to me. And then I kept going and I handed the mic back to Aaron, the general counsel that was sitting next to me. And then I paused and I took the mic back from him. I'm like, give me that mic back. Also, you should be proud that the state came up with options for you. They've got 2 options on how to get paid. They've got 2 options on how to sign these buyer broker agreements. And for you to sit here and say that you don't know, that you think that we're confused about this, sorry, not going to take it. And then I gave the mic back to Aaron. I was like, here, Aaron, you can defend yourself. And then it like ruined my joyful spirit on that panel. And I had to like shake it off. And afterwards, people came up to me and this one lady goes, why did you stop before you told her that it was time for her to retire? Thank you. Thank you for the support. I'm glad that I'm not crazy, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, it evokes a lot of emotion. It's we're discussing all of our paychecks, and obviously that's not a very comfortable thing to talk about, and you feel attacked. It takes a lot to take a deep breath, look at things objectively and say, okay, great. These are the new rules. I can't write them. How are we going to play in them?
That's right. Yeah. Yep. And, kudos to you guys for putting on these podcasts and these videos and these Zooms, for lack of a better word, to help educate people on what, on the mindset. And with every panel that I've been on, somebody starts with the optimistic mindset that most of the leaders in our business have. And I share that. I know you guys share it as well.
Yeah.
That, dude, the world has changed. And guess what? There's going to be leaders that emerge out of these changes, and there's going to be losers that emerge out of these changes. And what happens in between your ears decides which one you are.
So that's my favorite subject. And we certainly don't have time to dive into it today, but it's anytime there's disruption, there's opportunity. I'd love to have you back on. Max, I feel like Phil and I talked about contracts the entire hour, and you are better versed in taking advantage of opportunities than I am. And I'd love to have Phil back on pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if others think that would be great, we could do that, because really that's the exciting part. While other people are sitting on their hands, what can I do to provide better service? What can I do to get more market share? And that's what gets me going every morning whenever I start working.
Yeah. And I apologize, Keely. I totally agree with you that could have been a younger agent that did it. It just wasn't. It happened to be this lady that I accurately described. So I don't want to make it.
There was some young dumbass Gen Zer that said Riz in the middle of the statement, and also had something equally as dumb to say, I'm sure. So
Sigma, bro.
Sigma. So, okay, before we go, here's the fun question. CBOC team is wildly successful. You have automated it to a point where you're raking in tons and tons of money, more money than you could ever spend. And it's so automated that you're not sure what you're going to do with your time. But what do you do? It doesn't have to be a business. It could be a charity. It could be anything. What do you do now that money is solved for and you need something to do with your time?
So I would walk over to the Scottsdale Air Park and I would get on my PJ
Okay.
And I would fly to Austin and I would pick you up.
Awesome.
And then we would go to we'd probably fly into Telluride and spend maybe a weekend there, and then go pick up another friend somewhere else and go to a beach somewhere. I mean, like, live, right?
Okay, cool. You'd
Like,
MySpace Tom it. That's what you do?
you what?
MySpace Tom, man. He pieced out. He got like whatever, an 8 or 9 figure exit, and he became a freaking travel photographer. You got to follow him on Instagram. It's
All
like
right.
it was like the best exit ever. He's like, thanks for the money. MySpace is crashing, Facebook is going up, but I am set, and I'm going to be a travel photographer for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I tell you, one of the pieces actually that I don't know that you and I share this passion, but I would also race in the Baja 500. I would have a trophy truck, and I would certainly put that pedal to the metal and let it eat.
My wife and I did that. My wife and I did that as tourists in Cabo one time, and I crashed us right into a tree.
We could do a whole nother podcast on the 3 trucks I've rolled and on the Subaru I totaled. They were all fun, and I survived them all.
Yep. I got a picture of us airborne, and she's like, I can't believe we were airborne. And then we crashed into a tree.
Yeah, I put a friend's Subaru into a tree but anyway, that's a different story.
You didn't mess up the coexist sticker on it, did you?
Dude, it was a WRX all souped up. It was fantastic. Nice. Yeah. All-wheel drive in the dirt. It was fun.
Want to thank everybody who came today. Phil, Max, hang out for a second right after. Guys, thank you for coming. We're really, really grateful to have an audience and grateful for everybody who watched the recording of this. So thank you guys, and we'll talk to y'all soon.
Thank you.